focus to our light backgrounds. So let's start with a little bit of cyan and black mixed together. Decide if you want it to be more cyan or more black. And you can roll out an uneven shape that will fit inside your framing mat. Now, one of the things I love about this leaf stencil is how interesting all the negative spaces are. Do you see how all the spaces in between the leaves are different? That is, and then when I put it down and frame it up, what I'm trying to do is create different kinds of different shapes, different size shapes with the framing mat and the stencil. So I've chosen one of those masking frame leftover ink light prints to print over. And I think what is interesting is those vertical and horizontal marks. Newsprint pickups, get rid of that plate ink. Now this is the first time that I've used the stencil, so the detailed impression is somewhat light. And I want you to remember that today. If you have a brand new stencil and you're looking for a strong detailed impression, you're going to have to either let the ink build up naturally or press the stencil into the ink several times to get the ink to build up. So that was a very light, detailed impression just on a plain piece of white print paper. Now this stencil is quite big, so it's kind of hard for me to leave open spaces within the framing mat. But, so this is about the third time that I've used the stencil. You set it down on the thick layer of dark ink. Frame it up. I will hope to leave some space at the tip there where it goes. And I'm going to print on that light orange one. So remember again, on your shaped impressions, which is the first impression, you're going to have mostly black except for where your stencil is. You will cover up everything else. This is a really nice, strong, detailed impression. Frame it up with my mat and get a light impression to print over. And experiment with what you print onto. I'm finding that those horizontal block prints left with the leftover ink are really interesting. Now I'm switching to another stencil. I have used this one before, so there is a buildup of brown ink, brown and black ink on the back of that one. And the reason I didn't wash it is because it's cut out of manila folder, which is fragile. So there's my first shaped impression, just of the main stencil. Plenty of newsprint pickups. And when you're dealing with a manila folder or a paper stencil like this one, it's a lot more fragile than the Tyvek stencil. So when you peel it up, be gentle and watch and make sure you're not tearing it. Again, I put it on another one of those random pickups, and I really like the way the shapes in the background come through. Now I'll lay down some ink. This one is small enough so that I can maybe leave some opening spaces on the edges of the print. And I've added a stencil from yesterday. So the found object stencil of thread is an easy one to work in with and complement the shaped stencils that we're using today. I think it gives it a little bit of interest, foundation. So once you get comfortable just using one main stencil, maybe you can think about combining it with some threads or weeds or some other found stencils that may complement the shaped stencil that you're using as your main focus. Here I have a colorful top and a light bottom, and I think that bright magenta really draws your eye right to our focus, which is kind of interesting. Here I'm trying another stencil. It is a figure that fills the page quite tightly, so I am giving my figure, because it's kind of an action figure, space to move, so I have more open space where she's headed rather than putting her dead center. So I'm giving her space within the print to move. This is the first impression, so the detail is fairly light. I'm going to just pick that one up on a plain piece of paper for reference. When I peel my stencils off, I peel them off and lay them ink side up somewhere around the workspace. That tends to help keep things a little bit cleaner. Here's the second shaped impression. I was able to leave a little open space on the right there. So I think that creates interest in a basic shaped impression. And I also use the thread as a balancing mark. So if you have action figures, think about how you're placing things and are you giving the figure or the action space to move around your print. You don't want her to move straight off the edge of the print. So I'm going to add a little bit of weeds to this print to complement. One thing that I love to do is have, you know how our shape stencils are big and solid, and I think by adding delicate threads and weeds, you're combining different marks, which creates interest. So you have some very delicate marks and some pretty strong shaped marks. Okay, so I'm peeling it back, sneaking a peek and burnishing, and if I see there's bits of ink, I roll it back down and burnish again. So you can see here the difference. By adding a couple of delicate stencils to the big shape, it adds quite a bit of interest. I always do a lot of newsprint pickups with clean newspaper, peel off my stencils, set them to the side. When you pick up a shaped impression, notice where you're picking it up, because sometimes you're going to make a fingerprint. And I tend to always pick them up by the head, and then I have a fingerprint by the head. So if you can consciously say, oh, where am I picking the stencil up, and if I make a little smudge, is it going to affect the impression? So again, I've chosen one of those random matte pickups, the ink left behind our matte that we did on the very first day. And I just think this is a beautiful print. You've got like this geometric stuff going on, and you've got details and an action figure and movement. So we're just gradually adding marks to complement each other and to create interesting, delicate impressions. So here I've got another stencil, and I've automatically added a couple of weeds and twigs to emulate branches for this bird. Again, the bird is looking very directionally in one way, so I want to leave more space on my print on that side where the bird is looking. That's a shaped impression. Lots of newsprint pickups. And here I decide, let's see if we can stamp a mark into this detail. So I'm going to try to stamp in a moon. I've used a bit of the plate to roll out a bit of ink, and I've got a cap that I'm trying to stamp a moon shape into. My selection may not have been perfect, but the idea is good, so I could always repeat this if I'm not happy with the stamping tool I used, or if I wanted to be a little smaller or a little bigger. So as you progress, you can add a stamped mark to your delicate detailed impression, or even to your shaped impressions. Again, that was a random pickup, light background print, and I just love the way the marks complemented the detailed impression. Now I'm choosing another stencil and automatically going into and adding a delicate, this is a very big shaped impression that will fill most of my print space, and so I'm adding a couple of little twigs in there to add a delicate line to kind of complement the main shape. Using one of those thread prints from the other day, because I have a big shape, those threads are going to show through in the big open shape. And I like that. I like how the threads are like his brain, kind of. Newsprint pickups as usual. Be careful when you newsprint pickups that you don't move your delicate stencils, because that will make your impression lighter, because you'll be picking up the ink underneath rather than just around. Gently peel up your stencil, set it to the side, ink side up. Get another light impression. And again, I'm using one of those random pickups. I just find that those random pickups with the vertical and horizontal marks are just so interesting beneath the detailed impressions. Peel up my mat, set it to the side, and ink up my plate. Now here I've got another stencil that I haven't used before. So this is how you build up ink on a stencil. You press it into the ink, move it, press it into the ink again, move it, press it into the ink again. And that would be like doing 3 prints, and it just builds up the ink on the back side of your stencil. Okay, so now this is my final stencil of the day. I've laid down my dark ink. Let's try stamping into the black ink for the shaped impression. So I'm pulling off a little bit and adding a few marks in there. And this is a small stencil, so I'm using a bigger detailed weed as a tree element. Lay down my framing mat, pick a pretty solid, even impression, and pull my shaped impression. Make sure you really burnish around the edges. So I think that stamped element really kind of adds to that shaped impression. Do a couple of newsprint pickups, remove my stencils, and now I'm going to try to stamp on a mark below the house so it looks less like it's floating and it's more anchored to the bottom of the print. I have a pretty even impression. The sides are a little bit lighter than the center color area, and I really love how this came out. All right, enjoy. I look forward to seeing what you guys come up with.